Iran Air Flight 655 had been shot down by missiles fired from a U.S. Navy warship. As families grieved their lost loved ones, the world demanded answers. Why did America shoot down a passenger jet? And what was the world in for next? By mid-1988, Iran and Iraq had been at war for 8 years. Among the reasons for the conflict was a years-long border dispute involving the Shatt al-Arab, a short river formed where the Tigris and Euphrates come together. The river forms part of the Iran-Iraq border. The Shatt al-Arab is also Iraq's only direct connection to the sea, but is also important for Iranian shipping, and Iran was determined to share control of the Shatt al-Arab, whether Iraq was okay with that or not. This wasn't the only point of contention, though. In 1971, Iran had helped itself to some small islands in the Persian Gulf, and Iraq had their eyes on Iran's oil-rich Khuzestan province across the Shatt al-Arab. In 1979, the same year that Saddam Hussein came to power in Iraq, the Islamic Revolution, led by the Ayatollah Khomeini, booted the Shah of Iran and installed a militant Shia regime. Saddam and Khomeini despised each other, but for all their talk, the Iranian army wasn't prepared for a fight. Saddam spotted an opportunity, and he took it. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi forces invaded Iran, hoping to seize Khuzestan, but they were met with fierce resistance from Iran's Revolutionary Guard, an incredibly well-prepared militia formed after the revolution. By 1982, the Iranians forced the Iraqis to withdraw. Iraq offered a peace settlement, but Khomeini's hackles were up, and he ordered his forces to continue the war in hopes of ousting Hussein. The next 6 years were a slow-motion bloodbath, with Iran taking the worst of it. The front was located more or less at the pre-war border, where Iranian forces launched human wave attacks that failed again and again. The combatants began attacking each other's shipping routes and bombing each other's cities. Late in the war, Iran tried to enlist the Kurds. That's the ethnic minority who live in northern Iraq and the surrounding territories. Kurdish forces cooperated with the Iranian advance into Iraq's northern territory. This put the Kurds in Hussein's crosshairs, and he launched devastating chemical weapons attacks against them in a series of genocidal pogroms. By the summer of 1988, the body count was between 1 and 2 million, with neither side having much to show for their sacrifice. A ceasefire was declared on August 20, 1988. While the conflict was between Iran and Iraq, third-party states took sides in alliances that might seem strange in the 21st century. Iraq received support from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Pretty ironic, because Iraq just up and invaded them a few years later. But in a surprise move, the US and the then Soviet Union were both quietly rooting for Iraq as well. The US wanted Iran's virulently anti-American regime ousted, and the Soviets were hoping the Hussein regime might eventually create a socialist Iraq. Iran had fewer supporters, at least openly, given the untested nature of its new deeply religious government. But one unexpected ally stood out. Although it would never happen today, Israel covertly supported the Iranians in hopes of hobbling Hussein while enabling the immigration of Iranian Jews to Israel or the US. In the Middle East, all wars inevitably involve the control and movement of oil. And in 1984, with the land war at an impasse, both Iran and Iraq took their conflict to the water in what became known as the Tanker War. Tankers were the most important, but not the only targets, as both sides attacked the other's ability to export products and import resources. At first, Iraq had the advantage of French Exocet missiles, while Iran was forced to improvise with smaller weapons intended for land use. They weren't powerful enough to sink large ships, but they could and did kill and injure crew members. Meanwhile, all this was going down in the busy waterways of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, a key artery for the global oil trade. In early 1987, China sent Silkworm missiles to Iran, which, despite their lightweight name, were a formidable threat to Iraqi shipping. Instead of simply badgering ships and killing the odd sailor, the Islamic Republic could now hit back hard against Iraq and their allies. As a result, theoretically neutral Kuwait appealed to the US and others to defend shipping in the Persian Gulf. The US placed Kuwaiti oil tankers under the US flag, which meant they were under US Navy protection. That's why the USS Samuel B. Roberts was in the Persian Gulf on April 14, 1988. Despite warnings about mines in the area, the Roberts struck one, and the resulting explosion tore a 21-foot hole in the ship. While no one was killed, 10 crew members were injured, and the ship limped to Dubai for emergency repairs. In retaliation, the US launched Operation Praying Mantis on April 18, 1988. Over the course of a single day, Americans engaged Iranian forces in the largest surface-based combat the US had seen since Japan's surrender in World War II. American forces destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms that were being used for surveillance support, sending in the Marines to scope out one of them for intel before the final explosion.
They must know that we will protect our ships, and if they threaten us, they'll pay a price.
3 Iranian warships were sunk that day, and their most notorious, the Salaban, was heavily damaged and forced back to port. The US lost 2 pilots in their helicopter, but they bloodied Iran's nose and were prepared to keep going. Shortly after praying Mantis, the US announced it would protect all neutral shipping in the Persian Gulf, establishing an indefinite US naval presence in the area. By mid-1988, the relentless Islamic Republic was still in the mix. In the Gulf, the naval arm of Iran's Revolutionary Guard continued to cut off Iraqi shipping routes, while the US continually intervened. On July 2nd, Americans ran off Iranian vessels attacking a Danish tanker.
They would round robin the ships while they're shooting it, trying to catch it on fire.
On July 3rd, 1988, Iran was back at it, threatening a Pakistani ship, then shooting at an American helicopter sent to investigate. That's when things went off book. After the chopper incident, the USS Vincennes bucked orders and left its post, entering Iranian waters.
The fact that the helicopter was shot at virtually required a response.
As Iranian ships faced off with the Vincennes and another US ship, the Elmer Montgomery, the Vincennes fired and sank 2 Iranian vessels. At about the same time, Iran Air Flight 655 was taken off from Bandar Abbas Airport on Iran's southern coast for the short hop across the Strait of Hormuz to Dubai. Its flight path took it almost directly over the battle as it was unfolding. While Iran Air 655 was still in Iranian airspace, the USS Vincennes fired 2 surface-to-air missiles at the airliner, hitting it in the wing and tail. The plane broke into 3 pieces and plummeted into the Gulf. There were no survivors.
The airliner was within 9 miles of the Vincennes, and that's the heat of combat excuse given by the Pentagon.
Iran Air 655 was a victim of catastrophic circumstances, a pileup of chance and human error, resulting in a disastrous miscalculation. U.S. forces in the Gulf were aware of scheduled air traffic in the area, including Flight 655, which was in an established civilian corridor within Iranian airspace, but the flight took off about 30 minutes late. That information wasn't relayed to American command, which meant that the jet's appearance at a moment of high tension was unexpected. To make matters more confusing, forces in the area were operating in 4 different time zones, and Bandar Abbas Airport was a combination civilian and military facility, so it wasn't a wild leap to think a hostile aircraft could come from there. The captain of the Vincennes, William C. Rogers, was another wild card. He was known for being aggressive and always down for a fight. Already that day, he'd crossed into enemy waters without authorization. At the time of the attack, the Vincennes had just executed a move that, let's just say, was unusual.
It turned sharp enough that if you were standing, you had to hold on to something to keep from falling over.
This is an almost 600-foot-long boat, so you can imagine how sharp it must have been. Lights were flashing inside the ship as it fired, making it difficult to think or read information clearly, as the crew would soon realize. By the time they understood the truth, it was too late. Shortly after Iran Air 655's takeoff, the Vincennes radar system identified both the airliner and an Iranian F-14 fighter jet on the ground. Someone on board the Vincennes, who was never identified, apparently got them confused and mislabeled the passenger liner as the F-14. Another American ship got this faulty info from the Vincennes and locked onto the plane, but realized from the flight path that it must be a civilian craft. But no one on board the Vincennes put that together, nor did they ask for clarification from any of the American F-14s flying in the area.
The Pentagon will not reveal what it says was classified information telling it was an F-14.
Meanwhile, the Aegis targeting system on board the Vincennes was so new and complex that most of the crew didn't know how to use it yet. Used correctly, Aegis could automatically track and respond to 200 potential threats at the same time. But that doesn't matter if one of the officers doesn't use it and just puts sticky notes on the radar screen, as a Vincennes surface tactical warfare officer did that day. On the Iranian side, military crafts sometimes use civilian friend or foe radar signals, so the commercial signal coming from the airliner didn't necessarily mean it was a civilian craft. But even if the airliner had been an attack jet, a single F-14 would have posed little danger to a ship the size of the Vincennes. At least it was highly unlikely to sink the ship. And some questions arose about Flight 655's pilot, Mohsen Rezaian. He was an experienced pilot who often flew the Bandar Abbas to Dubai routes, and he didn't do anything wrong. He was in the designated civilian corridor, transmitting the right frequency, and ascending on a flight path that should have been unremarkable. But had he missed an opportunity to identify his craft clearly to the American warships below? Rezaian had a lot to do on a short flight, and he was in contact with air traffic control in Bandar Abbas and Dubai during the fatal journey. He couldn't have known about the scuffle happening in the water below him, but an alert had gone out months before to pilots operating in the area, advising them to monitor air distress frequencies and be prepared to identify themselves. It didn't happen. When the Vincennes requested identification, Rezaian either didn't hear them or reasonably assumed they weren't directed at him, since he was on an established flight path. In the aftermath of the crash, many Iranians were convinced the US had intentionally shot down the civilian craft. Some feared the attack meant the US was openly entering the war on the side of Iraq. This fear and the deaths aboard Flight 655 are among the reasons Iran agreed to end the war in August 1988. The American public was also critical, in part because military spokespeople lied in their initial reports, describing the doomed airliner as descending at the time of the shooting, operating outside of the established flight routes and over international waters. Photographers embedded with the crew of the Vincennes captured fist-pumping celebrations after the plane was hit. This was before they realized their mistake, but created the impression of a locker room free-for-all.
An Iranian Airbus is presumed crashed. Please look for survivors or aircraft wreckage.
The Aegis system was said to be foolproof, so how was such a tragic mistake even possible?
There was a lot of soul-searching, disbelief. That's not supposed to happen. That's not what we were here to do.
A post-mortem investigation by Rear Admiral William Fogarty was scrubbed for public release, but eventually the Vincennes' off-book actions came to light. Still, no one aboard the Vincennes was disciplined, and many later received medals, including Captain Rogers. The official US position remains that the incident was regrettable but not unreasonable. Captain Rogers and the crew of the Vincennes made a rational decision based on the information they had during the heat of battle. As such, the United States has never admitted fault in the shooting down of Iran Air 655.
Well, I think it was an understandable accident to shoot and think that they were under attack from that plane.
In 1989, Iran brought the United States to the International Court of Justice over the incident. After years of negotiation, in February 1996, the US agreed to pay Iran $131 million in compensation. Just under half went to the heirs of the deceased, the rest went to the Iranian government. The settlement, along with a brief and carefully calibrated acknowledgement of deep regret, brought the legal dimension of the incident to a close, but it sure seems a far cry from justice.